Hey everyone, tonight we're diving into the treacherous waters of Caribbean piracy and the brutal reality of what happened when the age of sail met the business end of royal justice. We're exploring the life and capture of a female pirate captain, because apparently some of you thought being a woman in 1715 was challenging enough without adding wanted dead or alive by 3 different navies to your resume. So before we set sail into this tale of freedom, folly, and very permanent consequences, take a moment to like the video if you enjoy these deep dives into history's darker corners, and subscribe if you want more stories about people who made spectacularly poor life choices with style. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's always amazing to see our global crew of insomniacs and history enthusiasts gathering from everywhere between midnight snacks and morning coffee. Now, dim those lights, maybe grab some rum if you have it, or tea if you're more civilized than our protagonist, and let's settle in for tonight's journey together. Fair warning, this isn't going to end with everyone sailing into the sunset. So, you think you could have been a pirate captain? That's precious. Really? Like a goldfish planning a bank heist. You thought you were untouchable. You thought the sea was your kingdom and your ship was your castle. You thought wrong. The Royal Navy's cannons had other ideas, and their ideas involved turning your magnificent vessel into expensive driftwood while you watched from the deck of their pristine man of war, hands bound tighter than your captain's purse strings. But let's back up. Before you found yourself contemplating the artistic merits of rope burns, you were somebody. Not just anybody, but Captain Red Mary, scourge of the Caribbean, terror of merchant vessels, and the woman who once made a Spanish admiral cry actual tears by stealing his favourite hat. Your crew respected you, feared you, and occasionally offered you the good rum without being asked. Those were the days. You started this life because legitimate employment for women in 1715 involved either marrying someone disagreeable or scrubbing floors, until your knees gave out. Piracy offered a third option, taking what you wanted from people who probably didn't deserve it anyway. The recruitment process was simple. Can you hold a cutlass without cutting off your own fingers? Congratulations, you're hired. Can you climb rigging without falling to your death? Bonus points. Can you terrify merchants into surrendering their cargo with nothing but a withering stare and creative threats involving sea creatures? Your captain material. Your ship, the Crimson Revenge, wasn't much to look at initially. Previous owner had questionable taste in paint and an unfortunate habit of not maintaining the hull. But she was yours, and you loved her the way other people love their children, except your child had cannons and could outrun the law. You spent 3 years turning her into the most feared vessel between Port Royal and Tortuga. The black flag with your personal skull design, complete with a rather fetching bandana, struck terror into the hearts of anyone unfortunate enough to spot it on the horizon. Your crew was handpicked. Big Tom, who wasn't particularly big but earned the nickname by being the only person brave enough to argue with the previous Big Tom before throwing him overboard. Scarlet, who got her name from her hair colour and her tendency to leave crime scenes looking like someone had spilled wine everywhere. One-eyed Pete, who actually had both eyes but liked the mystique, and Captain's mate Rodriguez, who handled navigation and the important business of making sure you didn't sail directly into rocks while distracted by counting treasure. Life was good. Merchant ships surrendered at the sight of you. Other pirates gave you respectful nods and wide berths. Port authorities pretended not to see you when you needed supplies. You had a reputation that opened doors and filled your coffers. You were living the dream, if your dream involved constant danger, questionable hygiene, and sleeping on a ship that creaked like an arthritic skeleton. Then came that Tuesday morning that changed everything. Rodriguez spotted sails on the horizon. Not merchant sails, which were fat and slow and full of lovely cargo. Not pirate sails, which were patched and threatening, but usually minded their own business. These were Navy sails, clean, crisp, and attached to ships that moved like they had somewhere important to be and weren't planning to ask permission. HMS Retribution. You should have recognized the name. Should have remembered the stories about Captain Blackwood and his particular hatred for pirates in general and female pirates in particular. Should have noticed that his ship carried more guns than some port cities. Should have turned around and sailed in literally any other direction. Instead, you did what every self-respecting pirate captain does when faced with overwhelming odds. You decided to fight. The battle was brief and educational. You learned that Navy gunners practice their aim considerably more than merchant sailors. You learned that naval ships are built to take punishment as well as dish it out. You learned that Captain Blackwood's reputation for tactical brilliance wasn't just clever marketing. Most importantly, you learned that pride makes a poor substitute for superior firepower. The Crimson Revenge, your beautiful, fierce, beloved ship, took a direct hit to her mainmast, another to her hull, a third that sent your favorite cannon rolling across the deck like an extremely dangerous bowling ball. Your crew fought bravely, but bravery doesn't patch holes or replace rigging or make cannonballs bounce off your chest. Big Tom fell defending the quarterdeck. Scarlet went down swinging her cutlass at 3 Marines simultaneously. One-Eyed Pete finally earned his nickname when a piece of flying wood decided to make it official. Rodriguez grabbed your arm as water started pouring through the hole in your hull. "Captain, we have to surrender." The words tasted like poison in your mouth, but the alternative tasted like drowning. You lowered your flag, not the white flag of surrender, because pirates don't carry those, but the act of lowering any flag sends the same message. "We give up. Please don't sink us quite yet." Captain Blackwood boarded your dying ship with the ceremony of a man conducting a funeral. Which, in a way, he was. The funeral of your freedom, your crew, your entire way of life. He was exactly what you expected, tall, grim, with the kind of mustache that suggested he took grooming seriously and moral flexibility not at all. His uniform was spotless despite the battle, his sword undrawn but prominently displayed, his eyes the colour of storm clouds and about as warm. "Captain Red Mary, I presume." His voice carried the authority of the crown and the satisfaction of a man who'd been hunting you for months. Or should I say, former Captain Red Mary. Your seafaring days are over. Your surviving crew, all 6 of them, were shackled and herded onto the Navy vessel like cattle heading to market. Which wasn't far from the truth, considering most would end up sold as indentured servants if they were lucky, or decorating gallows if they weren't. You watched them go. These men who'd followed you into battle and shared their rum and trusted your judgment right up until your judgment got them captured. Their eyes held no accusation, which somehow made it worse. The Navy ship was everything your pirate vessel wasn't: clean, organized, full of men who bathed regularly and followed orders without creative interpretation. The deck gleamed white, the brass fittings sparkled, and everything had its designated place marked with small, neat labels. It was like being inside a floating accountant's office, if accountants carried loaded muskets and had strong opinions about not tying. Your new accommodations were in the brig, naturally. A cell barely large enough for a coffin, which was probably intentional symbolism. The bars were solid iron, recently painted, and designed by someone who clearly understood that desperate people become creative about escape attempts. No loose stones, no convenient shadows, no helpful idiot standing guard. Just you 4 walls, and the gentle rocking motion that reminded you constantly that you were trapped on someone else's ship, sailing toward your own doom. Captain Blackwood visited you that first evening, carrying a leather-bound ledger and the air of a man settling accounts. 17 ships, he read from his notes, 43 recorded attacks. Theft totaling approximately £8,000 sterling, 1 count of assault on a royal official, multiple counts of murder, piracy, and disturbing the peace. He looked up from his book. "Have I missed anything?" You could have mentioned the time you accidentally sank that slave ship, but since that was probably your only morally defensible action in recent years, you kept quiet. Depends on whether you're counting the piece I disturbed on purpose, or just the accidental disturbing. He didn't smile. Navy captains apparently had that particular facial expression surgically removed during officer training. Your trial will be held in Port Royal. The evidence against you is overwhelming. The penalty for piracy is, as you well know, death by hanging. Death by hanging. The words settled in your stomach like bad fish. You'd known this was always a possibility, of course. Every pirate knew the eventual price of the profession. But knowing something intellectually and facing it practically are different experiences entirely. Intellectually, you understood that jumping off a cliff would be fatal. Practically, standing on the edge and looking down made your knees forget how to function properly. When? The question came out steadier than you felt. We'll reach Port Royal in 4 days. The trial will be a formality. Your reputation precedes you, Captain. The governor has been looking forward to making an example of you for quite some time. Governor Weatherby. You'd heard of him. Efficient administrator, devoted family man, and absolutely ruthless when it came to dealing with pirates. He'd cleaned up Port Royal's pirate problem by the simple expedient of hanging every pirate he could catch and posting their bodies where other pirates would see them. His message was clear: find a new line of work or find a new neck, because yours won't last long in his territory. The next 4 days passed with the strange, suspended quality of borrowed time. You weren't dead yet, but you weren't exactly alive either. You existed in the space between, watching Navy sailors go about their duties with the casual efficiency of men who knew they'd be going home to their families at the end of the voyage. They brought you water and hardtack twice a day, emptied your waste bucket with professional indifference, and otherwise treated you like a piece of cargo that happened to breathe. Some of them stared. Word had spread that the infamous Red Mary was aboard, and curiosity apparently overcame naval discipline. You'd expected hatred, fear, maybe disgust. Instead, you saw something more complicated. These men had heard the stories about you. The merchant ship you'd taken without firing a shot, because your reputation alone made the captain surrender. The time you'd outmaneuvered 3 Navy vessels in a single afternoon. The Spanish treasure galleon you'd captured by disguising your ship as a friendly trader until you were close enough to board. To them, you weren't just a criminal facing justice. You were a legend facing mortality, and legends weren't supposed to die in ordinary ways. They looked at you the way people look at exotic animals in cages, fascinated, slightly nervous, and wondering what you might do if the bars weren't there. You spent those days thinking about choices. The choice to become a pirate instead of accepting a life of limitations. The choice to fight the Navy instead of running. The choice to care more about pride than survival. Each decision had seemed perfectly reasonable at the time, but linking them together created a chain that led directly to this cell and the hangman's noose waiting in Port Royal. Your fellow pirates had always joked about hanging. At least it's quick, they'd say, or better than drowning, or just make sure you wear clean undergarments. Gallows humour, literally. But now that the gallows were approaching rapidly, the humour felt forced. Hanging might be quick, but the moments leading up to it stretched like taffy. The walk to the scaffold, the crowd, the reading of charges, the placement of the noose. Quick was relative. Port Royal materialized on the horizon like a fever dream of civilization. White buildings gleaming in the Caribbean sun, church spires reaching toward heaven, and a harbour busy with legitimate commerce conducted by people who paid their taxes and slept soundly at night. It was everything pirate ports weren't: clean, orderly, and thoroughly disapproving of your lifestyle choices. The trial was indeed a formality, though not in the way you'd expected. Governor Weatherby had apparently decided that a public spectacle would serve his purposes better than a quick execution. Your trial would be held in the town square, with the entire population invited to attend. Justice as entertainment, conviction as theatre. You were to be the star of a morality play, where everyone already knew how the story ended. They moved you from the ship's brig to the town jail, a stone building that smelled of despair and disinfectant. Your new cell was slightly larger than the previous one, but the improvement was relative. Instead of iron bars, you had stone walls with a small window that showed you exactly what you'd be missing when they hanged you: sunshine, freedom, and the general ability to make your own decisions about when to wake up. The jailer was a man named Porter, who'd apparently drawn the short straw for guard duty. He was nervous around you, which was flattering in a morbid way. Here you were, chained and locked up and facing certain death, and he still worried you might somehow escape and resume your life of crime. Professional respect, of a sort. Don't suppose you'd consider a bribe. You asked him the first night, more out of curiosity than genuine hope. He nearly dropped his lantern. Bribe? Me? I'm a god, fearing man with a family to feed and a reputation to maintain. I wouldn't take your dirty pirate gold if you offered me your entire treasure. I wasn't offering my entire treasure. I was thinking more along the lines of a modest finder's fee for misplacing the key to my cell. There is no finder's fee large enough to make me risk the governor's wrath. He's hanged men for less than helping pirates escape. This was probably true. Governor Weatherby's approach to law enforcement was thorough and unforgiving. Still, it never hurt to ask. Pirates were optimists by necessity. You had to believe things would work out somehow, even when all evidence suggested otherwise. The trial was scheduled for the following Monday, giving the good people of Port Royal a full weekend to work themselves into a proper state of righteous indignation. By Sunday evening, crowds were already gathering in the square, setting up chairs and blankets like they were attending a country fair. Which, from their perspective, they were. Free entertainment, moral satisfaction, and the chance to see a legendary pirate meet her end. What more could colonial society ask for? Monday morning arrived with the kind of brilliant sunshine that made everything look deceptively cheerful. The kind of weather that belonged to picnics and sailing trips, not trials and executions. But weather doesn't care about human affairs, and the sun shone just as brightly on hangings as it did on weddings. They brought you from your cell in chains, naturally. Can't have the condemned pirate making a run for it in the middle of her own trial. The crowd pressed close as you walked to the makeshift courthouse they'd erected in the square. Hundreds of faces, all eager to get a good look at the infamous Red Mary. You'd performed for crowds before, but never quite like this. The judge was a man named Pemberton, imported from England specifically for this trial. Local judges, apparently, might show unwanted sympathy or be susceptible to bribes. Pemberton had the look of a man who'd never entertained a sympathetic thought in his life, and would consider a bribe an insult to his professional integrity. His wig was perfectly powdered, his robes immaculate, and his expression suggested he'd already written your death sentence and was just waiting for the appropriate moment to read it. Governor Weatherby sat in the front row, dressed in his finest colonial finery. This was his show, his demonstration of royal authority and colonial justice. Every pirate in the Caribbean would hear about this trial and understand the message. This is what happens when you challenge the Crown's authority in British waters. The charges were read with ceremonial gravity: piracy on the high seas, murder, theft, assault on royal officials, disturbing the peace, conspiracy against the Crown. Each charge carried the death penalty, which seemed like overkill, but legal systems apparently believed in thoroughness. Your defense attorney was a young man named Morrison who'd drawn the assignment like a man draws plague duty. He was competent enough, but his heart wasn't in it. Hard to mount an enthusiastic defense when your client is guilty of everything they're accused of, and the evidence includes dozens of witnesses, captured loot, and a reputation known throughout the Caribbean. The prosecution presented their case with theatrical flair. Witness after witness testified about your crimes. Captain Henderson, whose merchant vessel you'd taken off the coast of Jamaica. Father Martinez, whose mission ship you'd robbed while he was transporting supplies to convert the heathen natives. Lieutenant Cooper, whose patrol boat you'd sunk during your escape from Tortuga Bay. Each testimony painted you as a monster in petticoats, a woman who'd abandoned her natural gentleness and maternal instincts to embrace a life of violence and crime. The prosecutor, a theatrical man named Ashford, made much of your gender. Gentlemen of the jury, he proclaimed, we see before us not merely a criminal, but an aberration of nature, a woman who has forsaken her God, given role as protector of hearth and home to become a predator of the seas. This was rich, coming from a society that gave women exactly two career options, wife or spinster. But pointing out this hypocrisy seemed unlikely to help your case, so you kept your observations to yourself. Morrison did his best with an impossible situation. He argued that you'd been forced into piracy by circumstances, that your crimes were motivated by necessity rather than greed, that your gender made you less culpable than your male counterparts. It was a valiant effort, but arguing that women were naturally less criminal was a double-edged sword. If women were naturally gentle, then your crimes were even more shocking than a man's would be. The jury deliberated for exactly 17 minutes. Barely enough time to file into the jury room, take a quick vote, and file back out. Their faces told the story before the foreman opened his mouth. Guilty on all charges. Sentence to be pronounced immediately. Judge Pemberton stood with the gravity of a man conducting a religious ceremony, which, in a way, he was. The ceremony of legal justice, complete with ritual phrases and traditional procedures. Mary Catherine O'Malley, known as Red Mary, you have been found guilty of piracy, murder, and crimes against the Crown. Do you have any final words before sentence is passed? Final words. The last thing you'd ever say as a free woman, because after this you'd be nothing but a condemned prisoner waiting for the rope. You could beg for mercy, but mercy wasn't in abundant supply. You could proclaim your innocence, but everyone knew you were guilty. You could curse them all, but that would only confirm their opinion that you were irredeemably evil. Instead, you stood as straight as your chains would allow and looked directly at the judge. I regret nothing. I lived as I chose, sailed where I wanted, and took what I needed. If that's a crime, then I'm guilty as charged. But I've seen more of the world, and lived more fully in my 30 years than most of these good people will in their entire lives. It wasn't the repentant speech they'd hoped for, but it was honest. And if you were going to die, you'd die as yourself, not as some penitent version they preferred. Mary Catherine O'Malley. Judge Pemberton intoned. You are hereby sentenced to death by hanging. May God have mercy on your soul, for this court shall have none. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, as if they'd just witnessed a particularly satisfying play. Justice had been served, order had been restored, and the pirate menace had been dealt with appropriately. They could all go home feeling safer and more righteous than when they'd arrived. But the hanging wouldn't happen immediately. Colonial justice moved at its own pace, and executions required proper preparation. The gallows had to be constructed, the executioner had to be summoned from Kingston, and the governor wanted time to maximize the educational value of your death. A proper execution was a community event, a chance for society to reaffirm its values and demonstrate the consequences of challenging authority. They returned you to your cell to wait. The stone walls that had seemed merely confining before now felt like a tomb. 3 days until the execution. 72 hours. 4,320 minutes. Time moved differently when each moment brought you closer to your last. Minutes stretched like hours, but somehow the days seemed to flash by with terrifying speed. Porter the jailer brought you better food now, though whether this was kindness or guilt was unclear. Condemned prisoners got final privileges, a proper meal, clean clothes for the execution, visits from clergy to prepare their souls for the afterlife. You declined the clergy. If God wanted to judge you, he could do it without help from his self-appointed representatives. Your former crew members were brought to see you the day before the execution. The 6 survivors looked like they'd been through hell, which they probably had. Naval justice wasn't known for its gentleness, and pirates weren't known for receiving the benefit of any doubts. But they were alive, which was more than could be said for Big Tom, Scarlet, One-Eyed Pete, and the others who died fighting. Rodriguez looked the worst. Your navigation expert, your trusted advisor, your friend. He'd aged 10 years in the past week, and the weight of survivor's guilt sat heavy on his shoulders. Captain, he said, and his voice cracked on the word. I'm sorry. I should have seen them coming sooner. Should have insisted we run instead of fight. You did your job, Rodriguez. We all did. Sometimes that's not enough. They're transporting us to Jamaica tomorrow, he continued. Indentured servitude for the ones with useful skills. The others. He didn't finish the sentence. The others would hang alongside you, but later, when the governor didn't need them for a public spectacle. You wanted to tell them it would be all right, but lying to dying men seemed pointless. Instead, you shook each of their hands through the bars, feeling the coluses earned through years of sailing and fighting together. These men had trusted you with their lives, and you'd led them to destruction. That weight would follow you to the grave, however briefly. The final night was the longest of your life. Sleep came in fragments between moments of stark terror and strange acceptance. You'd always known this was how pirate stories ended. The lucky ones died in battle, quick and clean. The unlucky ones ended up in cells like this, counting down their final hours and wondering if they'd made different choices, whether they'd be somewhere else entirely. But regret was a luxury you couldn't afford. You'd chosen this life with your eyes open, knowing the risks. You'd sailed free for 8 years, answering to no one, taking what you wanted, living exactly as you pleased. Most people never got 8 months of genuine freedom, let alone 8 years. If the price was a rope around your neck, well, every treasure came with a cost. Dawn broke with the kind of golden light that belonged in paintings, not execution days. Beautiful mornings should be reserved for beautiful occasions, but nature didn't consult the social calendar. Birds sang outside your window, as if this were just another day, which for them it was. Only humans made such elaborate rituals out of death. Porter brought you a final meal: fresh bread, real butter, beef that hadn't spent months in a barrel, and wine that didn't taste like it had been filtered through old socks. Condemned prisoner privileges. You ate slowly, not from appetite, but from a reluctance to finish anything that might be your last. Every bite was a moment longer in the world, a moment further from the rope. They brought you clean clothes for the execution. A simple white dress, clean and modest, designed to make you look less like a fearsome pirate and more like a repentant sinner. The symbolism was obvious: white for purity, simplicity for humility, a costume for the role they wanted you to play in their morality pageant. Time to go, Porter said, and his voice was gentler than usual. Even jailers, apparently, felt some sympathy for condemned prisoners on execution day. Or maybe he was just relieved that his uncomfortable duty was almost over. The walk to the gallows felt both endless and instantaneous. The crowd was larger than it had been for the trial, drawn by the promise of a good hanging. Merchants had closed their shops, children had been dismissed from school, and families had packed lunches to make a proper outing of your death. Entertainment was scarce in colonial Jamaica, and public executions drew crowds like travelling circuses. The gallows stood in the centre of the square, newly constructed and still smelling of fresh wood. A simple but efficient design: platform, trapdoor, rope, and a crowd of eager spectators. The executioner was a professional imported from Kingston, a man who took pride in his work and guaranteed a clean break of the neck rather than slow strangulation. Professional courtesy from one expert to another. Governor Weatherby stood on the platform, ready to make a speech before the main event. This was his moment of triumph, his demonstration that British authority extended to every corner of the Caribbean. He looked exactly like what he was, a successful colonial administrator who'd built his reputation on maintaining order through decisive action. Citizens of Port Royal, he began, his voice carrying across the crowded square, we gather today to witness justice. For too long, pirates have terrorized our waters, threatening honest commerce and peaceful communities. Today, we see the end of one of the most notorious pirates in Caribbean history. He continued in this vein for several minutes, turning your execution into a celebration of law and order. You were no longer a person but a symbol, a representation of everything decent society opposed. Your death would send a message to every pirate captain in the Caribbean: this is what happens when you challenge royal authority. Finally, the speeches ended and the real business began. The executioner checked his rope with professional thoroughness, making sure the knot was properly tied and positioned. The trapdoor mechanism was tested to ensure it would drop cleanly. Everything had to be perfect for a proper execution. Shoddy work reflected poorly on everyone involved. They positioned you on the trapdoor and placed the noose around your neck. The rope was rough against your skin, heavier than you'd expected. This close to death, your senses seemed hyper-aware. You could smell the crowd's sweat, hear individual conversations, feel the Caribbean breeze on your face. Your body's last desperate attempt to experience everything it could before experiencing nothing at all. Any final words? The executioner asked. It was traditional to offer condemned prisoners a chance for last words, though most were too terrified to take advantage of the opportunity. You looked out at the crowd of faces, all waiting eagerly for your death. Merchants who'd complained about pirate raids, soldiers who'd hunted you, families who'd come to watch you die as entertainment. Good, decent, law-abiding people who would sleep better tonight knowing that Red Mary was no longer terrorizing the Caribbean. I die as I lived, you said, your voice carrying clearly in the morning air. Free. The executioner nodded respectfully and moved to spring the trap. This was it. The end of your story, the final page of your legend. In a few moments, Red Mary would be nothing but a memory, a cautionary tale told to scare children and discourage potential pirates. But stories you'd learned had a way of continuing even after their protagonists died. Your legend would outlive your body, growing larger and more dramatic with each telling. Years from now, people would still tell stories about Red Mary, the female pirate who terrorized the Caribbean and died unrepentant on the gallows at Port Royal. The trapdoor opened beneath your feet, and you fell into darkness and legend. Your body swung from the gibbet for 3 days, as was customary for executed pirates. A warning to others, a symbol of royal justice, a reminder that crime didn't pay. Children dared each other to touch the gallows. Adults crossed themselves and hurried past. The message was clear: this is what happens to those who challenge authority. But messages, like stories, can be interpreted in different ways. Some saw your death as proof that crime didn't pay. Others saw it as evidence that even legends could be killed by enough rope and gravity. A few, the ones who understood that freedom always came with a price, saw something else entirely. They saw a woman who'd chosen her own path and followed it to the very end. Who'd lived 8 years as her own master and died without apologies. Who'd proved that even in a world designed to limit women's choices, it was possible to grab freedom with both hands and hold onto it until someone pried your cold, dead fingers loose. Your crew, the survivors, were transported to Jamaica as planned. Some adapted to their new lives as indentured servants. Others died working sugar plantations under the brutal Caribbean sun. A few escaped and returned to piracy, carrying stories about their former captain who'd faced death without flinching and died cursing her enemies with her final breath. The stories grew in the telling, as stories do. You became 10 feet tall and bulletproof, capable of sailing through hurricanes and outwitting entire fleets. Your treasure, which had consisted mostly of stolen goods quickly spent on supplies and rum, became a vast hoard buried on a secret island. Your death became a heroic last stand rather than a simple execution. Governor Weatherby got his promotion, as expected. The successful elimination of the Red Mary threat looked excellent on his record and demonstrated his fitness for higher office. He went on to govern other colonies, always with the same efficient ruthlessness that had made him successful in Jamaica. Captain Blackwood received commendations for his role in your capture. The Navy appreciated officers who could deliver notorious pirates alive for proper legal proceedings. He continued hunting pirates throughout the Caribbean, always professional, always successful, always slightly disappointed that none of his subsequent captures generated quite the same excitement as bringing in Red Mary. Judge Pemberton returned to England with his reputation enhanced. Colonial postings were stepping stones to better positions, and presiding over the trial of a legendary pirate was exactly the kind of high-profile case that impressed the right people. He went on to sentence many other criminals, but none as famous as you. The Crimson Revenge, your beloved ship, was repaired and pressed into service with the Royal Navy. They renamed her HMS Justice, which showed either a sense of irony or a complete lack of imagination. She served faithfully for another 15 years before foundering in a hurricane off the coast of Cuba. Even ships, apparently, had their destined ends. Your legend spread throughout the Caribbean and beyond. Sailors in taverns told stories about Red Mary's exploits, each version more dramatic than the last. Children played pirates in the streets, fighting over who got to be the famous female captain. Ballad singers composed songs about your adventures, your love affairs, and your defiant death. Some of the stories were even true. The truth was simpler and more complicated than the legend. You'd been a woman in a world that offered women limited choices, so you'd made your own choices regardless of what the world thought appropriate. You'd been a pirate because it was better than the alternatives available to someone of your birth and circumstances. You'd been good at it because you'd been smart, ruthless, and lucky enough to die famous rather than forgotten. Your real treasure wasn't gold or silver, though you'd certainly stolen your share of both. Your treasure was 8 years of absolute freedom, 8 years of making your own decisions and living by your own rules. Most people, men and women alike, never got that much genuine autonomy. They lived and died according to other people's expectations, other people's rules, other people's definitions of acceptable behavior. You'd refused to accept those limitations. You'd taken a ship and a crew and carved out your own space in a world that insisted women should be content with smaller spaces. You'd answered to no one, compromised with no one, and apologized to no one. If that made you a criminal, then you'd been the best criminal you could be. The gibbet where your body hung became something of a landmark. Visitors to Port Royal were shown the spot where the infamous Red Mary had met her end. Local guides embellished the story with each telling, adding dramatic details about your final words, your defiant behavior, your mysterious treasure that was surely buried somewhere nearby. Eventually, your bones were taken down and buried in the criminals section of the local cemetery. No marker, no memorial, just another grave among many. But graves, like stories, don't always stay where they're put. Years later, when the cemetery was expanded, workers claimed they couldn't find your remains. Some said the bones had been stolen by treasure hunters. Others suggested they'd been claimed by former crew members for proper burial at sea. The most persistent rumor, whispered in taverns and repeated by those who understood the power of legends, was that the grave had been empty all along. That Red Mary had somehow cheated death one final time, slipping away from her execution to sail off toward new adventures. It was nonsense, of course, witnessed by hundreds of people who'd seen you hang and watched your body swing in the Caribbean breeze. But legends don't require factual accuracy, only emotional truth. And the emotional truth of Red Mary was that some people refused to be contained by conventional endings. Some stories are too big for simple conclusions. Some women are too fierce for ordinary deaths. Years passed. Decades. The Caribbean changed as empires rose and fell, as slavery was abolished and new nations were born. Pirates became extinct, replaced by steam, powered navies and international law enforcement. The age of sail gave way to the age of steam, and wooden ships with canvas sails became museum pieces and tourist attractions. But stories endure longer than the times that create them. Children in New Providence still played pirates, still fought over who got to be Red Mary. Historians wrote books about the golden age of piracy, always including a chapter about the most famous female pirate captain. Novelists wrote romanticized versions of your story, adding love interests and moral complexity that would have amused you. Hollywood eventually discovered your legend and turned it into movies, each one more dramatically inaccurate than the last. You were portrayed as everything from a bloodthirsty villain to a feminist hero, depending on the decade and the audience's expectations. The real Red Mary, complicated and contradictory and human, got lost somewhere between the historical record and the entertainment industry's need for clear heroes and villains. But perhaps that was appropriate. You'd never been particularly interested in other people's opinions while you were alive, so there was no reason to expect you'd start caring after death. Let them make you whatever they needed you to be: symbol, cautionary tale, inspiration, or entertainment. The woman who'd lived behind the legend was gone, but the legend itself had taken on a life of its own. And maybe, in some parallel world where stories have power and legends refuse to die quietly, there's still a ship called the Crimson Revenge, sailing the infinite oceans of possibility. Maybe there's still a captain who answers to no authority but her own, who takes what she wants and apologizes to no one, who proves that freedom is worth any price, even death. Maybe Red Mary is still out there somewhere, just beyond the horizon, laughing at the wind and defying anyone foolish enough to try to contain her. Maybe death was just another authority she refused to acknowledge, another set of rules she decided didn't apply to her. Or maybe she's exactly where she always said she'd end up: free.